What do you think is the most important thing that we talked about?
Gardening.
Touché. Welcome to the backyard farm. Hey, how's it going, guys? I am Tate, and this is
Tegan.
And this is
Lydia.
And we are out here in the backyard farm talking about the top 5 things that we are growing that we're excited about in our backyard farm. From a kid's perspective.
Number 1 is ACONCAGUA roasters.
Oh, so you got big, giant, sweet peppers as your number 1?
Yes.
All right, Tegan, here we are. We're at the ACONCAGUA roaster pepper. What were some of your pro tips for growing this big bad boy?
When you plant it, don't put it too far in. Just pat down the soil.
It's not like a tomato. You don't need to bury it deep. You bury it shallow when you plant it. That's a good pro tip. I'll give you my number 2 pro tip, which is irrigation. Irrigation with food in it is my number 1 pro tip for the entire garden. For these peppers, it really does dictate how fast and big their bloom sets occur. My number 3 pro tip is this bottom trellis. The bottom trellis not only helps them from falling over, but it makes it so that we get to stretch our pepper plants out like we did on this one, so they're nice and wide, and then they grow up in the middle, and it gives you a lot more pepper sites. Number 4, especially for these, is having a nice mulch layer to keep the soil from getting super, super hot. And number 5, having a shade cloth for our peppers here in Colorado. Plants, just like us, like to have some shade. It gives them a break to let them gather more energy to then handle more sun.
It's very
It's very fun? Let's check out some more pro tips on the rest of those top 5 vegetables you got.
The blueberries.
Blueberries!
Number 2, blueberries. The pink lemonade.
Pink lemonade. Top pro tips for growing blueberries are number 1, plant them in acidic soil. When I was prepping the soil for this bed, I made sure to add things like sulfur and soil acidifiers. You want your pH of your soil to be a good amount lower than the rest of your garden, especially if you can't adjust your pH in your drip irrigation. So you want to compensate by making the soil very, very low in pH. As you can see, most of these varieties aren't having any problems. My number 2 pro tip for growing blueberries is to give all your blueberries their own container. And if they're next to especially a fruit tree, they could overtake that fruit tree, not only in the root system, but also up above. My number 3 pro tip for growing blueberries is make sure you have a lot of mulch on the soil. The more wood-based mulch you have on the soil, the more that it's going to help to keep your soil pH low for a longer amount of time.
And leaves.
Leaves as well. The more decaying plant material you can have on your blueberry bed, the better, because it helps to keep the pH of the soil very low.
Sticks are very, very, very helpful.
And my next pro tip for planting blueberries is to make sure you throw pollinators right into the mix with as many beneficial bugs as possible. Blueberries, just like a lot of other things, heavily rely upon pollination.
The Big Bertha pepper.
Is that it?
It's called the Big Bertha.
That's
it's
what
a sweet pepper. But these are going in our tacos tonight.
You only need 1 pepper for the whole family when it's this big. What are you making for dinner tonight?
We're gonna have garden tacos. We got fresh onions. We got some purple kale, some curly green kale. We also have fresh yellow squash and some fresh zucchini and our ginormous Big Bertha pepper.
We have some huge ACONCAGUAs too.
Oh, I thought Tegan ate them all. You ate 5 ACONCAGUA roasters?
Yes.
You gonna have room for garden tacos?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go in. You gonna help me? You wanna be my sous chef? You gonna take a bite? Take a bite. Arr. Oh, and look at that. Look at the amount of moisture in there. It's just dripping.
Dripping with nutrients. Let's go to the strawberries.
Yay! Strawberry, strawberry. Dad, I found a ripe one.
Normally, I completely fail at growing strawberries, dude. And I feel that these strawberry growing pro tips are super essential. Cover the ground. Once you plant your strawberries, for the first couple weeks, they're basically just living on the ground, and every time they get watered or every time they get rained on, they just kind of fall into the ground. And I did a really thick straw mulch, and I specifically like the straw mulch with strawberries because it does compact down to be pretty thin. Because if you don't use mulch, your strawberries are gonna be just growing in the ground and getting messed with and dirty, which ultimately doesn't let them be that successful. Strawberry growing pro tip number 2 is they need a good amount of water. Strawberries, just like a lot of things in the garden, prefer high frequency, low volume of water, which I am huge into. I feel that that's one of the magics of drip irrigation that really allows your plants to skyrocket, is high frequency, low volume of water feedings, and strawberries definitely benefit. The next pro tip for growing strawberries, which is just like blueberries, is to cover them up. These have had the birds come along and definitely do some damage. So we're about to use this conduit support, and we are about to cover this whole area with some net, and we're gonna use really tight net, and we're gonna let it just drape right over the strawberries so that way I can keep all the birds off. What can you think of as the next strawberry growing pro tip, Tegan?
Definitely when you see them ripe, pick them, because if you wait overnight, bugs will definitely get on them and then start chewing on them.
And that's the other reason why we use not only a bird net, but a bug net. The next pro tip for growing strawberries is to keep their suckers under control. Now these suckers I'm okay with because I just harvested the kohlrabi in this section. Yeah, I want some extra strawberry plants, so I'm gonna let some of these climb over. Really, if you wanna plant your strawberries, plant them early, shade them in the middle of the summer, and then allow them to bumper harvest at the end of the year. Well, I think that that is enough strawberry pro tips for the day. We might as well head over to that purple kale. What do you think, dude?
Yeah.
Kale's easy to grow. Actually, I've completely fallen in love with growing kale in the last few years. It's great in smoothies, it's great on barbecue, it's great in tacos, it's great in a lot of different areas other than salad, where you would think it would be used most commonly. Number 1 pro tip with kale is to eat it as soon as you can. Even once your kale plant's starting to get about a foot tall and they've got 6 or 8 really healthy leaves on them, if you've got 4 to 6 kale plants, you're not gonna be able to keep up with it, especially only with a family of 4. And just as long as you take from the bottom and you never take from the top, and you can continue to eat this kale while it's nice and fresh and before it doesn't get super thick. My number 2 pro tip for kale is to start trimming it almost as soon as possible. You'll notice that these are trimmed up kind of high. I really like to have a good amount of space for not only airflow, but also allow the drip irrigation to spread all over the soil, but also so that you can keep your aphids off of kale, because aphids love to come and take over your kale patch. Look how much kale we have on 3 leaves.
I know.
Oh, whoa. So here is the reason that you want to start pulling your kale, not only unhealthy leaves, but also healthy leaves from the bottom up as early as you possibly have a meal for it, as aphids come in to kale before almost anything else in your entire garden. What's our number 5 favorite plant to grow out here?
Corn. Oh, shucks.
What do you think of the corn this year, bud?
It's crazy. It's taller than 3 of me.
3 of you? In the last week, I would say this corn grew like what, 3 feet? My number 1 corn growing pro tip is growing corn from seed. If you start with corn starts, you're wasting your time, because I planted these on June 1st. Today is August 2nd, and here we are. These things are 12 feet tall, and they're gonna finish in absolute perfect timing for our length of season. So my number 1 pro tip for growing corn is to plant seeds and don't plant starts. My number 2 corn growing pro tip, select varieties that are gonna pollinate at different times. When you cross-pollinate corn varieties onto each other, it can translate into the flavor as a starchiness or as a more grainy or a fibery style of corn. What type of pollination they get from other types of plants determines how soft they stay or how hard they become for germination and for growth of seed for the next year. If you're going to grow corn varieties in your backyard farm, make sure you grow varieties that have different maturity times. This different maturity time will ensure different pollination times to avoid cross-pollination, to avoid them from getting starchy or too thick or grainy or fibery.
And also, on your fences, you should put spikes so the squirrels don't come in and ravage all of your corn.
That is very true. Definitely, that could be a huge pro tip on backyard farms in general, but especially with corn, especially right as it gets beautiful and mature, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go harvest all the corn tomorrow. Well, you walk out that morning and there's a bunch of squirrels harvesting your corn for you. You can produce a lot of corn in a very small amount of space, especially in backyard farming. All right, so Tegan, the next corn growing pro tip that I've got is to companion plant it, because corn loves the 3 sisters planting methodology. If you use the corn stalk as the pole for the beans or the peas to grow up, and then you use the squash down below to shade out the weeds, it really is the perfect trifecta. I like to just do the squash on the front side, so that way I can actually pick and tend it. And I like to do the beans on the front third of the bed, so that way I can reach into those as well, because if it's too deep into the corn, with this many corn stalks, you're probably not gonna be able to get to the beans or peas in time. Timing is everything out here in the backyard farm. And speaking of timing, I think it's about time for us to go eat our garden tacos. What do you think?
Yes.
I really appreciate you coming out and hanging out with me. That was a fun time. Looking back, what do you think is the most important thing that we talked about?
Gardening.
Touché.
Definitely doing netting over your plants so the squirrels and birds and other animals don't get at your food before you do.
I wish I would have just done the gigantic bird net over the property. Hey, let's add it to the list for next year. Should we go ahead and tell Mom?
Yeah.
All right, let's go. Thank you very much. Have a good day.